I went through a dark night of the soul experience, and really that was a turning point. At that point, I'd been studying the mysteries for 20 years, and I really thought I knew something, and I was suffering from a little bit of spiritual pride. And with that dark night of the soul, it knocked me down to the ground, and I couldn't get up. My body wouldn't help me, my brain wouldn't help me, my ego wouldn't help me, and basically I had to reach up and ask God for help. And that's what they call the surrender of the ego. And I was standing before him, and he was seated in a Hierophant's chair, and I was kneeling, and he put a crown on my head. Well, I did not know what that meant at the time, and then I later found a book on the mystery schools. And in the fourth degree of initiation in the mystery school, the Hierophant puts a crown on the initiate's head, signifying that he's now qualified to teach the mysteries.
All right, my friends, I'm here with Hedin Daubenspeck, and he's an author and a mystic, and he's had quite the spiritual journey, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that, and we're going to go wherever it leads us. Welcome to the show, Hedin, and maybe you could start with a little bit of background on yourself, and we can get into your spiritual awakening and that journey.
Well, thank you, Blaine. You know, I'm living here in Oklahoma. I'm an old farm boy from Oklahoma. I grew up on the farm, and in the 1950s, and back in those days, the farmers went to the nearest church, and our nearest church happened to be a Baptist church. So I grew up in the Baptist church, and I had a little conflict with some of their interpretations and ideology, but it was causing me a little discomfort as a teenager because I wanted to fit in, but yet I was a little bit in conflict between their ideology and my own personal feelings inside in my heart. About the time I was 13 years old, I was riding horseback in the meadow on my pony, and we were riding through a meadow, and there was wildflowers throughout the meadow, and I could smell the fragrance of the wildflowers in my nostrils, and the wind blowing in my hair, and the sun shining, and I had a numerous experience, and I realized that God coexists with all creation, which is completely different than the Baptist teachings of God and man being separate.
Quite a bit.
And I didn't know at the time, of course, that's basically non-duality, and basically Western Abrahamic religions teach duality. And so I was tapping into the Eastern thought at 13, but it gave me the freedom to know that I could trust my heart and trust my intuition. I was a young man in my early 20s, and I realized I wanted to know all the wisdom the world could give me. And that desire came about because of the frustration with Christianity. I thought there surely must be some wisdom and some truth out there that would resonate with me.
Before you had that experience where you said you were running into some problems with the church already, and had you had any spiritual experiences leading up to that before that?
No, that was my first spiritual encounter, and it was almost like an ecstatic experience.
And where did you go from there then? After you had that experience and you started wanting to learn all the wisdom of the world, so to speak, did you continue to go to church and get flack for it, or did you head off in a different direction?
Well, I was really banging my head against the wall trying to find answers in the Christian faith. And so I tried Baptist and Lutheran and Catholic and Episcopal and Methodist and all the various different denominations, but I really could not get any satisfaction. By the time I was age 24, I discovered Manly P. Hall, and I started studying the mystery. So I'm 74 now, so I basically have been studying the ancient mysteries for 50 years.
That's quite a journey. I think I've been at it about maybe going on 40 years, but
well, I might be older than you.
A little bit. I'm 65, so yeah, you're a little ahead of me there.
I'm 10 years older, so give yourself 10 years and you'll be where I'm at.
Well, I hope so.
You know, I wrote in my book a little bit about my background and experience and different spiritual experiences I've had in my life. And one of the chapters is about the dark night of the soul. And in my early 40s, I went through a dark night of the soul experience. And really, that was a turning point. At that point, I'd been studying the mysteries for 20 years, and I really thought I knew something, and I was suffering from a little bit of spiritual pride. And with that dark night of the soul, it knocked me down to the ground, and I couldn't get up. My body wouldn't help me. My brain wouldn't help me. My ego wouldn't help me. And basically I had to reach up and ask God for help. And that's what they call the surrender of the ego.
Can you tell us a little bit about what triggered that dark night of the soul?
Well, I started hearing voices, and I was having kind of a psychotic experience of hearing voices, and they wouldn't stop. And that was lasted 4 years. Now, I come to learn that that was basically a shamanic initiation where I was initiated to be a shaman. And I do shamanic work, and I oftentimes go into trance and with questions and come back with answers. And so that was basically the classic definition of shamanic madness, which all the ancient tribes knew about, where the shaman will go into a state of madness for 2, 3, 4 years. In my case, it was 4 years. And that's their initiation, where they go into the underworld and basically find themselves and diminish the ego and create their union with the divine.
Yeah, and I think that happens in all cultures too. I don't know, the so-called holy men, if you will.
Well, I think all holy men, all shamans have to go through that experience. That initiation is not something I asked for. It's something Spirit gave me.
Yeah, I've had the dark night of the soul experience a few times, but the first time was the craziest one. But anyways, where did you go from there?
Well, that humbled me, hearing voices, and I was very humble. I was a bit of an intellectual before that. And after that, I kind of realized I didn't know anything. And so I became very humble. I spoke a lot less and listened a lot more. I continued to study. When I was 61 years old or 62 years old, the president of the University of Philosophical Research in Los Angeles called me on the telephone. And he asked me if I would join the master's program. He wanted me to get my master's, and he was interested in me taking his place as president of the university.
Wow.
He was 84, and he knew I had studied Manly P. Hall for 40 years. And so he was interested in me. And so I decided why not? And I joined the university and worked 3 years toward a master's degree. I stopped after 17 classes, 3 classes short of a degree, to start writing my book.
That's awesome. So Manly P. Hall is considered part of the theosophy group, isn't he? And did you study any of the other theosophy books like Madame Blavatsky and that sort of thing?
Well, I had the Secret Teachings, and the Isis Unveiled, and I had those books in my library. In fact, I have 3,000 esoteric books in my library. But I studied Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater, which are neo-theosophists. And that really was my foundation in theosophy. I think theosophy probably helped me more than any of the other teachings. Of course, I've studied Judaism and Hinduism and Taoism and Buddhism and Christianity and Native American cultures, philosophies of the world.
That's awesome. I've studied quite a bit of those too. I don't know, it sounds like not as much as you have, but one of the things that I've noticed is there's a lot of common teachings in all of those that they have with each other. In fact, more common than disagreements, as some people see. And I think it's also a matter of perspective. But what are your thoughts on that?
A mystic anywhere in the world over, from the beginning of time until now, every mystic has the same story, the same experience, the same truth. The truth of a mystic is the same universally for all periods of time. And it's undeniable, and it's something you have to experience to know.
Yeah. Well, and some people can't see that, I came through Christianity also, and actually Mormon Christianity, but I studied, the history of Christianity and the history of Mormonism, and then I, branched out and I began to study the esoteric writings and the ancient wisdom and that stuff too. And I quickly got in trouble in all of those, in the religions anyways, kind of like you, but later in life. And
well, Master Eckhart's the best known mystic in Christianity, but I've taken my lifetime study of the various world religions and boiled it down into about 5 words for each religion, which is my little code words to understand each religion. I don't need to read 50 volumes of text. I don't need to hear 100 preachers. I have 5-word code for each religion, and my favorite is probably Zoroastrianism, which the Jews discovered when they were enslaved in Babylon, and they brought it back to incorporated that into the Jewish culture. But in Zoroastrianism, Zoroaster taught 3 things: good words, good thoughts, and good deeds. And basically, what else can we control?
Yeah, 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 and that rings through all of the religion and the cultures if you look for it, you know. But
Well, I
unfortunately, a
mean,
lot of people look for the differences and emphasize those instead of all the, you know, and a lot of those differences are just differences in dogma or interpretation, really.
well, the dogma and the interpretation are man's effort to describe the unknown, and the difference between a theologist that studies the and defends the written word is a theologist defends what's already known and written. A mystic explores the unknown, and the difference between a believer and a knower, a believer and a mystic, a believer believes what he's told, and a mystic believes what he knows, and he knows from experience. And that's the difference between a believer and a mystic, and the difference between a theology and true spirituality.
Yeah, I agree, 100%, 100%. I think when I discovered that the scriptures were a metaphor or an analogy for the human experience, and then I discovered that those same stories went all the way back to the Babylonians and the Egyptians and and the Vedics and so on. I thought, wow, that's the same metaphor being taught, of course, in their culture and vernacular with, a few nuances with names and places and how things happen, but this basically the same story. That was a real eye opener. And once you see that, you can't go back. It's
Well, I think when you realize that you can boil God down into mathematics or music, and if you express God in mathematical terms, it becomes sacred geometry. And if you recognize sacred geometry as universal and timeless, and you realize 30,000 years ago the Essenians were studying sacred geometry, and you realize that all truth is basically a mathematical or musical expression, and then you realize words were added, stories were told to transfer that knowledge into some kind of common understanding for the simple folk of life around the campfire. And they got written down into books, but they're basically started off with sacred geometry.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with the Tibetan and the Alice Bailey writings?
I have studied Alice Bailey. My studies in Tibetan Buddhism is basically about meditation. I think Helen Blavatsky is probably one of my favorite people because she helped found theosophy. I've studied the Kabbalah and the tarot and astrology and numerology and a variety of things in my travels.
I was going to say that the Tibetan, or they call him DK because nobody can pronounce his name, Dwidjal Call or something like that. He says that we're like musical notes, and I thought that was interesting because you brought that up.
Well, Pythagoras basically taught that we're musical notes.
Yeah. So, and I've heard, thoughts in the mind of God, so to speak, or the universal consciousness, whatever somebody chooses to call it.
Well, I mean, in some places it says God is the word.
Yeah.
And basically the word is vibration, and we are all in vibration.
Yeah. Yeah. A word, yeah, sound is vibration. So, and yeah, and I think even the Tibetan himself likens it to strings on an instrument or a guitar or something. I don't remember exactly, but and I haven't read all of those books, but I've read some of them. I read one of the books, and then I've read bits and pieces of the others because it's difficult reading actually. So okay, so let's see. So you had your dark night of the soul, and did that change your direction in life? Did you lose family, friends, and acquaintances or or jobs or any
Well,
of that kind of stuff?
I mean, like everyone's life, I've had sad moments and betrayals and disappointments and joy and many experiences. And along the way, people have dropped off along the way. I took the time to write a book, and I published The Pony Ride to an Awakening. And I started a YouTube channel, and I've got a few videos up there that just general things to discuss. And I'm getting ready to launch my website around the first of the year. So just trying to help people. I post on Facebook every day. I post about 100 posts a week, trying to share wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think people need that. I have noticed lately, I don't know, maybe in the last year or so, but seems to be accelerating. There's sort of an awakening. I say a mass awakening, but it's not all of humanity, but a good part of humanity seems to be waking up to some degree or another that there's way more than, we've been taught in our culture and our religions and that kind of thing. Are you seeing anything like that? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my general feeling is that in the 15th century, the church gave the serfs hope of a life hereafter. And I think in the modern times, we no longer necessarily resonate with that hope in the same way. I think the people in modern times are looking for a personal experience with God. They want to have that personal experience within themselves. I think that's why we're seeing people leave the church because the church is no longer offering that, and they're seeking maybe through mushrooms or through a drug or maybe through some type of meditation. They're looking for a personal experience to create that personal connection, and I think that that's what our young people are looking for now.
Yeah. Do you think that's accelerating? Do you think people are on the right track, or do you think there's still a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation as people kind of stumble onto some of this stuff?
Well, my general feeling is that people are lazy and they don't apply themselves very much. A good transition from the traditional Christianity into New Thought is the Metaphysical Church's Unity Ministry of World Ministries and Center for Spiritual Living, which is the old religious science, Ernest Holmes and Charles Fillmore. And those metaphysical churches are a good stopping point, halfway point when you're leaving traditional Christianity. That gives you some kindred spirits, it gives you some opportunities for meditation and some truthful words that are allegorical rather than literal. And it's a good transition point. Unfortunately, I see people go there and get stuck there and they never leave there, which is the same trap as they had in traditional Christianity. The idea is to open your mind, open your eyes, and then move on to personal development and personal growth. But unfortunately, most people don't have the discipline for personal development and personal growth.
Yeah, I agree. I call it trading one box for another box, so to speak.
Well, it's a little better box. It's more comfortable. It's got padded cushions, but it's not. It's still a box.
Yeah, yeah. It might be a little bigger than the old box, but yeah, you're still stuck in a box. And so, if there's one thing I've learned, the more that I learn, the more I realize how little we actually really know about a lot of this stuff. So,
Well, it's interesting. I studied in the library for 40 years and I finished my master's degree. Well, I stopped in the master's program 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago. And I haven't opened a book in 10 years because I was busy writing my book and I didn't want to infiltrate my mind with somebody else's thought. But I also realized that I'd had enough. I'd gotten my foundation, my principles, and I no longer needed the library, and that my life today is about experience, and it's about learning from experience and taking the philosophies and principles that I had attained and gained and adopted for myself among the various cultures into practice and into living, into life.
yeah, I can relate to that definitely. I have a very hard time finding a book that can keep my attention at all. I occasionally will try to read something and go, this is just a rehash of something I already know.
Well, when I was writing my book, I did my best not to repeat anything that was already written somewhere, but I wanted to make it my original experience so that it would be unique. I figured there's plenty of libraries with other books.
Yeah, and I think that's good. It's always good to get a different perspective, maybe some of the same material that you've gone over before, but sometimes it's good to get a different perspective and like, oh, hey, I hadn't really thought of it that way before.
Well,
Yeah.
the reason I like reading is because I was never smart enough to have all the questions to ask God, but by reading various authors, through my reading, it would lead me to questions where I could contemplate and learn and study, and I would discover questions I never would have thought of simply sitting under an apple tree meditating. So the reading helped me find the questions.
Okay. Well, speaking of meditating, do you have a meditation practice that you practice regularly?
Well, it's interesting. I had a meditation class here in my home yesterday, and there were 9 men here and one lady teacher. And she taught me some interesting techniques. I basically use meditation in 3 categories. One meditation is through my crown chakra, which I call the superconscious mind. And then one meditation is through my pineal gland, which I call the conscious mind. And then one meditation is for my subconscious mind, which is basically below my head. So in the superconscious, my meditation is really a conversation with the divine. In my pineal gland and slightly above that is really where I connect with my spirit teachers and guides and talk to my ancestors and teachers. And then In my subconscious mind, which is below the pineal gland, I connect with my trauma, my history, my memories, my life experiences, and get to view them as an adult rather than as a 4-year-old child.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of our triggers are tied to that 4-year-old child, so to speak. So would you consider that the throat chakra or the heart chakra?
The subconscious really is all of the chakras below the pineal gland.
Okay.
And each chakra, of course, has its own principles,
Right.
but the subconscious mind resides in all of those. And it's a great technique to connect. Now, I learned one thing yesterday at the class, and I'll show you with my hands. The teacher said when you connect your thumb and first finger, it shuts off all your systems except your connection with your crown chakra. When you connect your thumb and second finger, it shuts off all the systems except your connection with your pineal gland. And when you touch your third finger with your thumb, it shuts off all the systems except your subconscious. And I tried that and it works.
Well, wow. I'm gonna have to try that. I mean, we've all seen the first one, with the classical meditation,
Yeah, we've all seen the first one, but the other ones were new to me.
yeah, they're new to me also too. And I've never been able to sit in the lotus position for very long. So,
Well,
uh,
I say that meditation is wherever you are, whatever you're doing, washing dishes, driving a car, sitting on the couch, typing on a computer. Meditation is really I practice 24-hour a day meditation, which is basically my practice as a state of mindfulness where I don't have any thoughts. My mind is clear and I'm in a listening mode and I'm listening to my teachers and ancestors. A lot of people probably do that, but they don't know they do that. Let me tell you how that's done. Telepathic communication is when a word, a phrase, or a sentence enters into your consciousness, but it's not you. It wasn't your thought. It's not from your brain. It just appears there. That's a telepathic message from your teachers and guides. So you use your intuition, you speak to your higher self, you speak to your ancestors and teachers through telepathic communication, which is the only way they can communicate with us, which is through the mind. And when that word or phrase or sentence appears in your consciousness and you don't know where it came from, it's coming from your teachers.
yeah, I agree, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I've always had trouble maintaining a regular practice of, the kind of the classical meditation where you sit and just try to focus your mind. However you do that with a mantra or a candle, or, there's very many various ways of doing that. And for some reason, I've heard that more often now that, I call it like a walking meditation or whatever you're doing. If you're focused on one thing, and even the scriptures say that you got to have your mind single to the glory of God, I think is or something to that effect. So if you're single-minded by focusing on whatever it is you're doing, or whether it's your work or something you're thinking about, that's a form of meditation. And I used to be into martial arts quite heavily, and I would train, especially when I was younger. And when I would run to train to get in shape. And man, I had all kinds of inspiration during that time, because it shut off everything else and I was single-minded. And so it kind of opened my mind to allowing, probably from my guides, which I didn't know or realize at the time, a lot of inspiration would come in.
I think everything's in divine order. The universe is too complicated for there to be accidents. So I take everything and I go with the flow. I've learned a long time ago that if you try to swim upriver, you'll eventually get tired and drown. That you have to go with the flow. You can't push your way against nature.
Yeah. Learn to work in harmony with nature. Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. So can you maybe tell us one of your more profound spiritual experiences that you've had? Something like that. You have anything you'd like to share like that?
I'm clairauditory, so I hear voices in spirit. I am not clairvoyant, so I don't see images. So there was an intuitive psychic friend of mine named Bright Eyes that did a reading for me, and she's clairvoyant, so she could see in spirit. And I'll tell you about a couple of episodes. One, she said, your teacher's here, Josephus, and he's in a classroom, and he's in the front of the classroom, and he's presenting himself as an owl with a gown and the cap, like a graduate cap. And so he was representing wisdom for me.
Are you talking about Josephus, the historian?
Josephus, a historian, is my spirit guide.
Okay. And did you know that it was him when you first came across him, or how when did you find out that this was the Josephus, so to speak?
In 1986, I met a spiritual artist, and she drew a picture of my spirit guides for me. There's 5 of them that she drew a picture of. And for 10 years, all I had was their picture. And then I met a spiritual elder in Tucson, Arizona, and she gave me their names. And then she helped me connect their names with their picture. So now I had the name and the picture. And so I started speaking to Josephus, and he started speaking to me, and we became acquainted. Gosh, I must have been in my early 50s. And so we've had a good communication ever since.
Okay. And did you ask him, are you actually the Josephus of history?
Well, I did ask him, and it certainly is my impression that he is. I had another experience with him, and I was standing before him, and he was seated in a Hierophant's chair, and I was kneeling, and he put a crown on my head. Well, I did not know what that meant at the time, and then I later found a book on the mystery schools. And in the 4th degree of initiation in the mystery school, the Hierophant puts a crown on the initiate's head, signifying that he's now qualified to teach the mysteries. So I took that as my go signal that I could speak what I had learned in the library. So at age 55, I started teaching.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So that's been 20 years now.
Yeah. So in theosophy, a 4th degree initiate is quite high up there or accomplished. I don't know what the right word is exactly.
Well, I think learned. I think, well, with my dark night of the soul experience and with the study of Hinduism, certainly I realized that it was necessary for me to surrender to the ego and diminish it and realize that I'm an instrument of the divine.
Right.
So I don't have any personal seeking. My work is divinely inspired, and I feel like I'm an instrument of God's will.
Yeah, that's great. And so just trying to walk in that, in your divine nature, so to speak, I guess. Is that
in your higher self.
Right, right. So I think that everybody has that capacity, but most people are asleep to it. What are your thoughts on that?
I became a Freemason in 1976. So it'll be 50 years in 2 years. It'll be 50 years. At the time, I thought about the mystery schools of Babylon and Egypt and Greece. And I had the opinion that probably less than 1% of the population at that time were qualified to enter the mystery school. And then I thought about modern times, and I thought, well, probably now, today, less than 1% are qualified to enter the mystery school. So basically, we're exactly the same place we were 4,000 years ago.
So what do you think the qualifications to enter the mystery school are, and why only 1%? I mean, you talked a little bit about that, but maybe a little bit more detail.
Well, in the ancient times, you had to be learned in mathematics and astronomy and logic and philosophy and to gain entrance to the mystery school. And in modern times, even though I became a Freemason in 1976 and I was initiated as a Master Mason, that was a ritual only. The true degree of becoming a Master Mason myself took 50 years of effort and work, study, self-improvement, learning, experience. I became a Master Mason through my own efforts. That ritual was just a symbolism.
Right, right.
And I would say that to enter the mystery school today, you've got to do the personal work to get you qualified.
Do you agree or think that some people are doing the work and maybe even going through some of the initiations, at least some of the sooner ones, and they don't even realize it. They just kind of are instinctively doing the works and getting the.
I'll give you an example of my dad. My dad lived to be 103. He was a farmer. And I would say now he was a Freemason, didn't even know it.
Right.
Because through our personal spiritual growth and development, our personal learning, our teachers and guides and the divine initiate us in different degrees, 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, through our astral body, through our invisible bodies and through our spirit. I think it happens naturally and something we can sometimes be aware of and usually not aware of.
Okay. I think that goes along with, and tell me if you agree with this too, that we set a life plan before we come into incarnation, and our guides and circumstances and things help try to move us along on on that plan, so to speak. And it's not like every little thing is planned out ahead, but there's sort of milestones, and your guides and so forth will kind of try and urge you in that direction. And of course, you have free will to not do it. But in my experience, people, if they continue to go off the rails, so to speak, too far, eventually, they'll get nudges and things in the right direction. If they continue to ignore it, they might get a crisis or something that forces them to reevaluate their life, so to speak. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know why, but for some reason, some people have to have the dark night of the soul more than once.
Yeah.
And I would say that people that are in AA or NA or that are addicted to drugs or alcohol are searching for God. They want that buzz. They're looking for the feeling. So they're in this quest. They want that feeling. They have found an artificial way to experience that, but becoming free of that addiction is learning how to find that independently and letting go of the artificial stimulant and finding that independently within your own consciousness.
Yeah,
but those addictions sometimes lead us to hit bottom where we can truly look up and reach up and say, God, help me. And that's when we can form a relationship with the divine.
Yeah, exactly. It's unfortunate that seems to be humanity's legacy, that we need a crisis to change direction more often than not, unfortunately.
Well, I've studied about the saints, and I've learned or studied that they reached that level with devotion, love and devotion. And I suppose to an amazing person, they could reach masterhood with love and devotion. But for the majority of us, we have to go through the dark night of the soul experience with that two before between our eyes.
Yeah, we tend to be a hard nut to crack for most of us, unfortunately.
Well, the ego is a hard nut to crack. I wrote an essay on the book of Exodus about the ego. So yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know, maybe it was a few years ago, there was a lot of stuff going around in the spiritual space, so to speak, on the internet about how you need to kill the ego. And I was like, no, you can't kill the ego. You need the ego. The problem is we let the ego run the show.
Well, you have to diminish it and say you're number two,
Yeah.
not number one.
Exactly.
The divine is number one.
Because it thinks it's the king and it's going to run the show. And if you allow it to, it will, and it'll lead you into the dark night of the soul eventually if you let it.
Exactly.
And so that's what a lot of us need, I guess. And so it even serves a purpose there. But you need it. It's the thing that tells you how to, to put gas in the car and not run into the guy next to you when you're driving down the road and that kind of thing.
Well, the ego is very necessary. It's a part of who we are. You cannot kill it. It's part of us.
You just need to bring
if
it
you kill
into
it,
subjection.
you kill us.
Yeah. Bring it into subjection instead of letting it run the show.
Exactly.
I thought I haven't seen a lot of that lately, and it could just be me, and that seems to be dying down. But every once in a while, I run across someone that says that. But so where do you think? So I think we do a lot. All of this stuff applies to us individually and collectively as a collective in humanity. So where do you think humanity is headed these days? You think we're moving forward? Maybe one step at a time at least. I think we've moved forward a lot from the days, from the days of the oh boy, what's the word? I can't think of the word of it. Before the Renaissance, the Dark Ages, so to speak, and we don't burn people at the stake anymore and that kind of stuff. So that's at least a step forward. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, really, when the church took control of the world and the control of all knowledge, and they burned all the libraries in Greece, and we went through the Dark Ages for good reason. Now we kind of got past that. The history of Islam and the history of Christianity is ugly, nasty, murderous, thievery. The Inquisition killed millions. The Islam killed, I don't know, 100 million Persians that were Zoroastrian, converting them to Islam. I guess Christian nations killed over 100 million Native Americans. I mean, so the history's blood. My opinion is, with that background and with that history, how can you show me the way to heaven? So I have a good question about that. Now, in modern times, I think the internet's giving us more knowledge, but knowledge without action is worthless. So we have to apply it. We have to incorporate it, internalize it, apply it. And it's knowledge put in practice that really counts. And that's where the actions speak louder than words. And that's where you reap what you sow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I always say that, the key to manifesting is to set your intention, make a plan, and go to work.
I think the key to manifesting is when your thought and your passion and your heart and your mind join forces.
Yeah.
When there's agreement between your passion and your emotion and your heart and your mind, then with that harmony, then manifesting can occur. Now, I don't say that manifesting is sitting on the couch waiting for Jesus to put a check in your mailbox. I don't think that's going to happen. My concept of manifesting is listening to ourselves, listening to our intuition. We will be given the idea, we'll be given the inspiration, but we're the footsteps here. We have to take the action. And then if you take one action, you'll receive the next instruction and you'll take the next action. You have to be patient and diligent and willing to do the work, and then you can manifest.
I pretty much agree with that. I think that some people say, oh, it's like magic, but the magic is the opportunities come to you if all those things are in line, like you mentioned.
But your spirit teachers are lining up connections for us all the time.
Yeah, and those connections come, but you still have to take advantage of those opportunities. If you're expecting money to show up in the mailbox, well, you're probably going to be disappointed. Even
Well,
then, even if it worked that way, you still got to walk to the mailbox and get the money.
yeah, the occult laws of precipitation, the occult laws of manifestation have been around for forever, timeless, and they don't change. The idea that you can just have an affirmation and manifest is, to me, only a third of the job. You have to actually have the idea, and then you have to marry it with your passion, and then follow it up with action.
Right, right. Yeah. I think some people can derail that by taking actions that's not inspired. They think, well, if I do this and this and this will work, instead of aligning and letting that inspiration come and going, oh, here's where I need to take the action.
Where I see a lot of people get in trouble is they'll have 5 ideas and they don't know which one of the 5 they want, but they have 5 ideas. Well, your spirit teachers and guides have difficulty helping you in 5 different directions at the same time. You have to choose one. And if you have one that you've chosen, then you can make progress. But when you're trying to have 5, then you're divided.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that hits home with me. I've had a lifelong struggle with that of spreading myself too thin, wanting to do everything all at once instead of, focusing on one thing at a time. And so I think finally in my older age, I'm starting to get that. I'm starting to be better at focusing on one thing.
Well, in my, I guess I was probably 35 years old. I was a comptroller of a manufacturing company that was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and I was in charge of the U.S. operations. I had 13 ladies on my staff, and I was working 60 hours a week. My desk was piled up. And one day I said, how can I change this? And I realized that I was procrastinating. And I said, I've got to stop procrastinating. So I started delegating tasks to other people that were well qualified. And I started getting stuff off my desk and asking help for my staff. And in a week's time, my desk was totally clear. And got down to a 40-hour week. So I haven't procrastinated since I was 35 years old, because everything happens now. There is no tomorrow. Tomorrow doesn't exist. Yesterday doesn't exist. All I have is now. So everything that comes into my mind gets done right now.
Yeah, that's a good habit to be in, and that's another thing that's taken me a lifetime to learn too. And we tend to fall back to our old habits, even when we learn something and we practice it for a while, and life comes to us and gets us stressed and that sort of thing. That's where being mindful, and being in a state of meditation, as you described it, can be helpful too. All right, my friend. So let's I don't know if it's switching gears, but maybe it's just the next gear a little bit. What do you think? What do you say to somebody who says, Hedin, I wanna be more like you. I want to connect with my divine side, so to speak. What can I do to do that? What would you say to someone like that?
My general advice is to build a platform for yourself, a foundation. I have 5 recommended reading lists that are in the appendix of my book: foundational, intermediate, etc., all the way up to advanced. Take the beginner list, the foundational list. Pick out 3 or 4 books and read those. And they'll expand your consciousness a little bit. And then when you're ready, read 3 or 4 more from the next list, because they're progressive. It'll push your boundaries out a little further. The idea is to give yourself a foundation of principles, philosophical principles, to help guide your morals and ethics, help guide your decision making, help you form a truthful perspective about things. You have to have a little bit of knowledge to have a truthful perspective. And my Buddha said, all of life is suffering. Well, all suffering is caused by ignorance, and a little bit of knowledge would stop suffering. So apply yourself with a little bit of reading and a few esoteric books and give yourself a foundation of principles to guide you. And then surrender the ego. You may have to have a dark night of the soul to do that, and stop seeking and realize that you already have all the answers within you. Just simply ask the questions and listen to yourself, listen to your higher self. All the answers are there. And then you'll connect with the divine.
Yeah, that's great advice, and that's a big one, I think. Our culture, especially if you're religious, have been in the Christian religions and stuff, is that prayer is a laundry list of things that you want God to do for you, and I call it the Santa Claus God, Whereas I used to get in trouble in church for saying, "Why don't you just shut up and listen?" So you give a laundry list and you say, "Okay, thank you in the name of Jesus Christ, amen." And it's like, well, did you stop to listen to see what you might hear from that?
Well, here's my take on that. When you're praying, it's you speaking to God. And when you're meditating, it's God speaking to you.
Right. Well, that's the thing. People speak to God, but they don't stop to listen. That'd be like me telling you a bunch of stuff and then walking away and never listening to what you have to say in response. So
I basically have two prayers. When I pray to God, I only have one word, Mother, Father, because God already knows my thoughts. He already knows my words. He already knows my deeds. He already knows my intentions. He already knows my actions. I just say, Mother, Father. That's all I say. He already knows my questions. He already knows the answer. I never pray for abundance. I only say, I just want enough. And enough is whatever God wants it to be because he knows my intentions.
yeah, that's good. I actually did a video on this. There's a scripture, and I call it the true art of prayer. It says, if you ask as if you've already received, you shall have it. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit. And I thought, gee, that's really interesting. So how come everybody's always asking for something? And so, my thought was, well, gee, if I was going to pray as if I was already received, how would I do that? Well, I would be thankful for what I already have. I would have gratitude. And I would just say,
in order to receive more, you have to be grateful for what you already have.
Yeah. And so that's it. That's about the only thing I do. If I think I want something or need something, I'll just be thankful that it's already there and it's already in my, and it'll eventually will show up. The opportunity will show up for me to have it, So,
well, something that I learned along the way is abundance is a circle and it's constantly in motion. You have to be a good giver and you have to be a good receiver. If you can give things, but you can't receive things, then you're stopping the flow.
yeah.
You have to keep that flow open. So you have to be a good receiver with one hand and a good giver with the other hand.
Yeah, that's really important. A lot of people aren't good receivers. Because they feel like, I don't need it or what they feel like. I'm not sure what the psychology is behind that, but there's, I'm taking care of myself. It's like, no, you need to give other people the opportunity to give too if you enjoy giving, so let them be blessed for giving.
Exactly.
And you can be blessed for receiving whatever it is they're giving you. So yeah, it's interesting what religion has done to us over the centuries.
I think Christianity in the 2,000 years since Rome has hurt humanity more than it's helped.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And Constantine got a hold of the scriptures, and that's when the Gnostic scriptures tried to get suppressed. And then we got the Nag Hammadi that showed up finally. And so we got some of those scriptures, and that's opened a lot of people's eyes. But you still have the traditionalists that just absolutely won't hear any of it, So I don't know.
I basically, when I'm asked, I tell people I'm a Baptist Buddha.
I like it.
Because I grew up in the Baptist church and I follow the Eightfold Path. But I basically am in alignment with the first century Christians, the Essenes. They believed in reincarnation. They were mystics. I'm in alignment with the first century Essenes, the first century Christians. But after the Catholic Church took over in the third or fourth century, I'm out of it. They lost me there.
Yeah. Me too. When traditional Christians ask me if I'm a Christian, I say no, but I'm a follower of Christ.
I believe in Christ. I think the Christ consciousness exists.
Yeah.
There were many Christs in history, many Virgin Mothers in history.
Yeah. Well, and they don't realize they don't even believe in the teachings in the Bible that Jesus supposedly taught, right? So they claim they do, but they don't understand them. So
you really have to search hard to find Jesus in Christianity.
Yeah.
It's mostly Paul.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul was a great esotericist and people don't understand him. If you take his teachings on the surface, yeah, it's like, what the heck is going on here? But he was, if you take it and use a metaphor of it for what's going on inside of you, then it starts to make some sense. So, but everybody has their things. But so yeah, and you have the factions in Christianity. Some are of Paul, and some are of this guy and of that guy. So pretty interesting stuff. So, but let's talk about your book again for a minute. And folks who are listening to this, I will link Hedin's book in the description so you can go there. What's the main theme of the book or the main goal that you had with the book?
My book was written to be a spiritual guide, from birth to death. I did not have a message. I'm not teaching. I'm not preaching. I'm not promoting a philosophy or a religion. I'm simply offering experience of being a spiritual mystic, a spiritual person, so that you can read what I've experienced and maybe that'll resonate with you, your own experience, and you realize that it's a solo journey, my friend. Jesus can't save you. Your wife can't save you. It's a solo journey. You have to save yourself. So the objective of my book was to not teach a path, but offer many suggestions and let you choose your own path, but offer it as a spiritual guidebook so that you could recognize when you're having a spiritual experience, resonate that it's also happened to somebody else like me. And I've offered some spiritual wisdom in there, like a chapter on silence, a chapter on the Eightfold Path, a chapter on life after death. I offer some wisdom. I was criticized by one of the professional book review critics for not having a message. Well, they missed the point of the book. The point of the book is that messages don't get you enlightenment. Experience gets you enlightenment. And you have to get away from words and books and intellect and ego. You have to go beyond mind to reach enlightenment, which means going beyond books and words.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So the reviewer missed the point.
Which often happens.
But I'm hoping that the people who read that book will realize that solo journey will lead them along the path of reaching an awareness where they no longer need the books and dogmas and philosophies, but they can go inside themselves and ask the questions and find the answers themselves.
Yeah, I agree. That makes me think of the traditional Christians think that, they talk about the narrow path and that there's only one. And I've always, I used to get me in trouble all the time. I would say, no, the narrow path is your path. That it doesn't mean that there's just one path and everybody's got to follow it single file. And they would say, no, it's, blah, blah, blah. You got to follow Jesus and so on and so forth, whatever that means to them. And I would give the example. I would say, no, if you're going to go to Arizona, there's lots of ways to get to Arizona. It depends on where you're coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's coming from a different place. It's a solo journey, isn't it?
Yeah. So the narrow path is your path. Nobody else can walk it for you. It's only the path that you can walk.
Exactly.
Is how I put it. So yeah, I agree with that 100%. No, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, because I don't hardly read any books anymore. I occasionally, like I said, try to start one, but I end up putting it down and never go back to it. So
I think that really, in order to know something truly, you have to teach it.
Yeah. I've always said that the teacher always learns more than the student, especially if it's a subject you're not as familiar with, and so you want to go research it and do that kind of thing. But even if you are familiar with it, but you go back and revisit it, you learn things that you didn't learn the first time around. Same thing with books sometimes. If they're good books and they're worth reading more than once, you'll go, how come I didn't catch that the first time, I read it. So
you might read basically the same recommendation 5 times and miss it. And the 6th time, an author will use a certain word or 2 words, and you catch it. And you don't know why you missed it 5 times, but the 6th time you catch it. That's why it's good to read multiple authors and multiple books to help you find that connection, because you're overlooking it. You're hearing it, but you're not hearing.
Absolutely. I remember I read one of the first, when I started looking for different avenues, and not necessarily spiritually, but for whatever I read Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, and everybody thinks that that's about money, which it is. But then years later, I ended up reading it again, and it's like, wow, this is a spiritual book. How come I missed that the first time I read it? There's all
The
kinds.
Master Key is a similar book.
Yeah, there's all sorts of spiritual principles in there. And it's because when I first read it, I was looking to make some money. I was young and I wanted to make some money and make my mark on the world, so to speak, and that kind of thing. And so that's all I saw in it. But then when I was more mature and read it in later years, it's like, wow, there's a whole bunch of spiritual principles in here that people miss. So
Exactly.
I thought that was really interesting. So that kind of goes along with what you've been saying. So we've been, let's see, well, we're a little bit over an hour, although we probably haven't been talking that long because of some of the technical difficulties. What, so first of all, we have your book and I will link that. If people wanted to contact you, is there some place you would want them to contact you, like an email or on Facebook or?
Well, I'm launching my website in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be called 21st Century Spirituality.
Okay. Well, I'll mention that in the description, and then when you get a link, I can add the link later on to it. Is there an email that you would like if people want it? Well, are you open for people to contact you or?
I'm open to be contacted. My email is my initials, HED, and then CPA, because I'm a CPA, HED CPA at AOL.com. I'm an old AOL guy.
Okay. I remember that. Yeah. Some people probably don't. Some of the younger folks might not remember some of that, but okay. And so I'm not ready to end just quite yet, but I wanted to ask you, I was going to say, what's your message to humanity? But what I wanted to do is before you go, what is some of the wisdom that you want to leave with people and that you think that might help them, inspire them, move them forward in any way possible?
Hmm. Well, if you hadn't asked me, I could probably told you. Let me think a second.
Yeah, no rush.
Let me think a minute.
Or anything that comes to mind. It doesn't have to be necessarily what I asked you. Just,
Let me tell you a story. Can I tell you a story?
oh yeah, that would be great.
I had a spiritual experience. I was in my first experience was listening to telepathy. I was in my 30s, and I was at the grocery store with my son and daughter. They were about 9 years old, 8 and 10, and we were getting an ice cream cone. It was summertime, and a voice came to me in spirit. A baby came to me in spirit and said, "Come back to the milk department." Well, that's the first experience I had with telepathy. But I could hear that voice, and I knew it was an infant, and it was clearly saying, "Come back to the milk department." So I was in the grocery store, so we went back to the milk department. And when I got there, there was a mother, and she had an infant in a basket. And that infant was suffering from spinal bifida, and I could obviously see he was suffering. And I started looking at the baby, and then the mom was curious why I was looking at the baby. And so I started talking to the mom. She explained that she was almost bankrupt from hospital bills, and that I told her I'm a Shriner, and we have 27 children's hospitals. And so I made that connection for her. But that infant saw me walk in the front door and came and got me. And that just proved to me that infants come into the world with all their knowledge and all their wisdom. We just have to learn how to communicate with them telepathically.
Yeah, that's quite the story. Yeah, I like that. That's pretty neat. I ran across a gal recently who works with autistic children, and she had some kind of a clinic or something. But anyway, she had some sort of a spiritual awakening and began to communicate with these kids and was actually making a lot of headway with a lot of them, some of them who couldn't even speak because she could communicate with them telepathically and this and that. And she ended up helping a lot of them that were, supposedly there was nothing that could be done, right? And the word got out, and then people just started bringing their autistic kids to her, and they're like, we haven't been able to have it. Nothing has worked to help our son. Can you help him? And she would help them. And some of these kids could be semi-functional, and some of them even became almost completely functional and stuff. And so, and then of course the medical establishment attacked her, and but she's still doing it. She said I couldn't deny that, and she did say my point is that she said that these kids, some of them are the next level human, so to speak, and we just have to learn how to communicate with them. And they can't make a lot of sense of our world because it doesn't make sense to them. So
I understand. They could be part of the sixth root race. We're
yeah,
mostly fifth root race people here, but we're all root races, really all mixed together.
yeah, that's interesting. My wife and I were just talking about that. So yeah, well, that's a great story. So is there anything else you would like to leave the audience with before we go?
Well, my book is publishing in Arabic next week, so it'll be in 7 languages. I have a YouTube channel. You certainly can go and listen to my videos. I have a website. I'm posting some of my written essays on my website, so you can read those. My job is to offer information, guidance, If it's useful, helpful, follow, read it. Don't trust me, believe yourself. Don't believe me, believe yourself. If it resonates in your heart, then it's probably true. If it doesn't, it's probably not true.
Fantastic. And I will link those in the comments, or not in the comments, but in the description, all the stuff that you just mentioned. And I appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me. And perhaps we can do this again sometime if you're up for it. And we can kind of check in on humanity and see how things are going, or
I'd like to do this again. I appreciate the opportunity. Maybe I can share this video on my YouTube channel as well. I'll have my webmaster email you, and we can work that out. And thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And we'll talk to you again soon.